Part 1. The Origin of Transformation. There is an ancient legend that says every person is born with an inner flame, a source of light that illuminates the path they are meant to follow. But not everyone finds that flame. Many let it fade away, consumed by mundane routines, nameless fears, and the alluring whispers of comfort. The ordinary days. Elias Verhofstadt was one of those people. At 32, he had a life that outsiders might call successful. A stable job at a prestigious financial firm in London, a modern apartment in Notting Hill, and a salary that afforded him the pleasures of luxury. Yet deep inside there was a void he couldn't put into words. Every morning, Elias woke up to the same old rhythm. He brewed a cup of coffee, staring out of his window as London's gray mist veiled the bustling streets. Then he put on his expensive suit and stepped into the endless cycle of spreadsheets, reports, and mind-numbing meetings. By the time he returned home in the evening, he would open a bottle of wine, turn on the TV, and try to fill the emptiness inside with movies that left no lasting impression. Was this the life he had dreamed of? How long had it been since he last asked himself that question? Elias once had dreams. As a young man, he was captivated by philosophy books, by stories of great individuals who had changed the world through their intellect and courage. But reality had turned him into someone else, a man chasing stability, social acceptance, and standards he never truly questioned. A letter from the past. One evening in December, as Christmas lights began to adorn London streets, Elias decided to rearrange his bookshelf, a task he had postponed for too long. As he picked up an old book, a yellowed piece of paper slipped out. It was a letter. The words on it made him stop in his tracks. Elias, my grandson, this world is much larger than what you see. But there will come a time when you must face the most important question of all. Who are you, truly? If you let life pass by without finding an answer, then no matter how much success you achieve, it will all be nothing but an empty dream. If ever you feel lost, go to the old chapel on Montserrat. There, you will find what I once found. The letter was written by Elias's grandfather, a man he had deeply admired, but never fully understood. He had been a philosopher, a thinker, but also a mysterious figure. Elias recalled afternoons as a child, listening to his grandfather's stories, tales of journeys, profound philosophies, and ideas that he had been too young to comprehend. Montserrat. The name echoed in Elias's mind like a distant call. His grandfather had never mentioned this place before. Why had he chosen it? Why did he believe Elias would find answers there? A strange urge. Something about those words made Elias's heart race. Not from nostalgia, but from a powerful feeling that this was more than just a letter from the past. It was a message from fate itself. That night, for the first time in years, Elias couldn't sleep. Thoughts of Montserrat lingered in his mind, pulling along unanswered questions. Who was he really? What was the meaning of his life? Why did he feel so empty despite having everything that society deemed as success? He opened his laptop and searched for Montserrat. It was a sacred mountain range in Spain, home to an ancient monastery that had stood for centuries. The Benedictine monks who lived there had dedicated their lives to silence, seeking truth away from the noise of the world. The images of Montserrat captivated him: majestic peaks, winding trails, and a small chapel nestled among the cliffs. Something in those pictures stirred a deep recognition within him, as if he had always known this place, yet never seen it before. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, he felt as if a voice whispered from within, "Go." leaving the safety behind. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept through his window, Elias had made up his mind. He would go to Montserrat. He requested 2 weeks off from work, something he had never done before. When his colleagues asked why, he simply smiled and said he needed a journey. Some looked surprised, others chuckled, assuming he was just trying to escape work stress. But none of that mattered anymore. As the plane soared toward Barcelona, Elias gazed out the window, watching the clouds drift below. He knew that the moment he set foot on Montserrat, his life would never be the same again. Part 2. The Journey into Darkness. The door to freedom does not open with a key, but with the courage to step into the unknown, setting foot in Montserrat. As Elias left Barcelona's airport, the sun was setting behind the distant mountains. The air here carried a different essence from London, warmer, yet infused with an unusual stillness. He boarded a train bound for the foot of Montserrat, where colossal limestone formations rose like nature's giant fingers reaching toward the sky. From afar, the Benedictine monastery emerged, nestled precariously between steep cliffs. It was more than just a place of worship. It was a witness to time, where generations of monks had devoted their lives in pursuit of truth. Stepping off the train, Elias pulled his small suitcase behind him. There was something different about the atmosphere, as if time moved slower here. Or perhaps it had never truly existed at all. He began his ascent along the winding path leading to the monastery. Darkness gradually fell, and the flickering lights from small houses along the way only deepened the air of mystery. Questions filled his mind. He did not know what he was searching for, but one thing was certain. He no longer wanted to return to his old life. The encounter with Brother Raphael. At the monastery's gate, an elderly monk awaited him. He wore a simple black robe, his face lined with deep wrinkles, yet his eyes gleamed with a light that seemed to pierce through one's soul. "Welcome, Elias," the monk said in a warm, steady voice. "You know my name?" Elias asked in surprise. "There are things one does not need to be told in order to know." Elias did not press further. There was something about this man that made explanations seem unnecessary. Brother Raphael led him into the monastery, where candlelight flickered against the ancient stone walls. They stopped in front of a small room where Elias would be staying for the next few days. The monk turned to him and asked, "You have traveled far to be here. But do you know what you are looking for?" Elias remained silent. He had asked himself this question many times, but had never found an answer. "Perhaps I am searching for myself," he finally said. Brother Raphael smiled. "Then you must be willing to enter the darkness." The journey into darkness. The next day, Elias began his new life at the monastery. No city noise, no demanding schedules, no social pressures, only quiet mornings, hours spent working in the monastery's garden, and long moments of solitude. But it was this silence that proved to be the most terrifying. Back in London, Elias had never had a moment to truly listen to his own mind. Work, phone calls, social media, everything had been a distraction, a way to avoid himself. But here, there was nowhere left to run. Suppressed thoughts rose like crashing waves, fears, doubts, unanswered questions. One afternoon, as he sat beside an ancient statue in the monastery courtyard, Elias asked Brother Raphael, "Why do I feel so restless in a place as peaceful as this?" The monk studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because you have never truly looked within yourself. We call it the inner darkness, the place where all that we refuse to face resides. Modern people fear silence, not because it is frightening, but because it forces them to confront themselves. Elias nodded. He had spent his whole life running from silence, only to now find it chasing him like a ghost. The meaning of emptiness as the days passed. Elias began to understand that the emptiness within him was not something abnormal. It was not a sign of failure, but an invitation. "Do you know," Brother Raphael said one morning, "why so many people feel that their lives are meaningless, even when they have everything?" Elias shook his head. Because they live without a true purpose. They mistake external goals, money, status, recognition, for inner meaning. But true meaning does not come from outside. It is found in how you choose to live each day. "But how do I find it?" Elias asked. The monk smiled. "By embarking on the journey, by stepping into the darkness." And in that moment, Elias began to understand one cannot find the light without first being willing to walk through the darkness. Emptiness was not a flaw in life, but a signal, a whisper from deep within, reminding him that it was time to change. An unexpected challenge. One evening, Brother Raphael summoned Elias to the monastery's library. "Are you ready for your first challenge?" he asked. Elias looked at him with curiosity. "What challenge?" "You will go into the Montserrat forest alone, carrying nothing but a single candle. You will stay there for the entire night." A chill ran down Elias's spine. Being alone in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by complete darkness, this was not what he had expected. "What will I learn from this?" he asked. Brother Raphael met his gaze. "Fear does not come from the darkness outside, but from what hides within you. If you cannot face it in a forest, how can you face it in your own life?" Elias took a deep breath. He knew there was no turning back. Tonight, he would step into the true darkness. Part 3. Facing the inner demon entering the night. Elias stood at the entrance of the Montserrat forest, holding nothing but a candle and a small box of matches. The thick darkness swallowed everything before him, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the steady hum of insects. He swallowed hard. Why would a grown man feel uneasy in a mere forest? But he knew the fear did not truly come from Montserrat. It came from a much deeper place. It came from within his own mind. Brother Raphael had been right. People do not fear the darkness around them. They fear what the darkness forces them to face inside themselves. Elias lit the candle. The faint glow softened his tension, and he took his first step forward. Man and fear. Every step he took on the dry leaves echoed too loudly in the stillness of the night. A creeping sensation of being watched slithered into his thoughts, though he knew there was no one there. Then a question arose in his mind. Why do we fear? Fear is a primal instinct. Early humans feared the dark because they could not see the predators lurking within it. But today, when wild beasts no longer threaten us, why do we still fear the dark? Because darkness is no longer an external danger. It has become a symbol of the unknown, of the things we have buried deep within our consciousness. We fear solitude because it forces us to face ourselves. We fear failure because it reveals that we are not as strong as we believed. We fear death because we do not know what awaits us beyond it. Elias realized that the greatest fear of humankind was never about the world outside. It was about the truths they were not yet ready to accept. Facing oneself. He reached a clearing in the forest where a large rock stood. Placing the candle down, he sat on the ground. Silence enveloped him. For the first time in his life, there was nothing to distract him. No phone, no music, no work, no people. Only himself and the darkness. And then the thoughts began to surface. He remembered the times he chose security over passion. He recalled the moments he ignored his inner voice out of fear of change. He saw the years that had slipped by, where he had mistaken existence for living. Suddenly, a strange emotion surged within him. It felt like anger, but not towards anyone else. It was anger at himself. How many years have I wasted? This was the moment where most people would turn away. When we confront the truth about ourselves, it is more painful than anything else. But Elias knew he could not run anymore. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He let the thoughts come, without resisting, without judging. He accepted them. The transformation of a man. No growth happens in the comfort zone. To change, one must step into the darkness, face the inner demon, and accept the truth about oneself. This is why the greatest figures in history all experienced a moment of darkness, a time when they could no longer live as they once did. Nietzsche once said, "If you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you." Carl Jung believed that true growth only happens when we confront our inner darkness, what he called the shadow. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not an enemy, but a teacher guiding us toward enlightenment. The difference between those who find light and those who remain in darkness is not their circumstances, it is their choice. A person can choose to run, or they can choose to face it. Elias knew this was the first step of transformation, the dawn of a new man. As the sky began to lighten, Elias realized he had spent the entire night in the forest without noticing. Something inside him had changed. Not because the forest was different, but because he was different. He was no longer afraid. Not because fear had vanished, but because he had learned to accept it. He stood up, holding the now extinguished candle, and made his way back to the monastery. Brother Raphael was waiting at the gate. "What have you learned?" the monk asked. Elias smiled. "I have learned that darkness is not the enemy. It is simply a part of us." The monk nodded. "Good. Then you are ready for the next step." Elias did not ask what the next step was. He had learned something far more important. The answer was not in what lay ahead, but in the journey itself. And his journey had only just begun. Part 4. Forging the Path. The first step of transformation. The silence of the days that followed. Elias did not leave the monastery immediately. After that night in the forest, he realized that change was not the result of a single moment, but a long and gradual process. A seed does not sprout instantly just because we wish for it to grow. In the days that followed, he spent more time observing life inside the monastery. The monks worked in the gardens, read books, meditated, and prayed in silence. No one hurried. No one tried to prove anything. Slowly, Elias began to understand something. The world outside moved too fast, yet no one seemed to know where they were going. People chased success, fame, and the approval of others, yet they never stopped to ask, "Why am I doing all of this?" They were like boats drifting with the current, without a rudder, without a destination, merely floating along with whatever society told them to do. Elias recalled the years he had spent climbing the corporate ladder, all the meetings, the projects, the relentless effort to impress his superiors. And now, having stepped away from it all, he realized a painful truth. Much of what he had pursued had never truly mattered. Meaning is not something we find, but something we create. One morning, while sweeping leaves in the monastery garden, Brother Raphael approached him. "Do you remember the question you have always carried in your heart?" Elias looked up. "The question about the meaning of life?" The monk nodded. "Have you found the answer?" Elias remained silent, for a long moment. In the past, he had believed that meaning was something to be discovered, like a hidden treasure buried somewhere in the world, waiting for those lucky or wise enough to find it. But now, he was beginning to understand. Meaning is not something that exists out there. It is something we must create. Brother Raphael smiled. Exactly. He continued. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." That why is not something given to you. It is something you must create for yourself. Human suffering does not come from life being meaningless, but from the fear of taking responsibility for creating that meaning. Elias nodded. For the first time, he no longer felt lost. The journey of creating one's own path. Modern society is trapped in a strange paradox. People search for a pre-made path, a perfect plan leading from point A to point B, a guaranteed road to success. Yet, at the same time, they crave freedom, wanting to do what they love and live a meaningful life. But these two desires cannot coexist. If we follow someone else's path, our life will never truly be our own. This is why the truly great figures in history were not those who followed established routes, but those who dared to forge their own paths. Picasso did not follow traditional painting rules. He broke them and created Cubism. Steve Jobs did not accept the limits of technology. He built things that had never existed before. Nietzsche did not conform to traditional moral frameworks. He rewrote the philosophy of his time. They all shared one thing in common. They did not wait for someone to give them a roadmap. They created their own path. Elias at the crossroads. One day, while meditating on the cliffside overlooking the valley, Brother Raphael approached him again. Now that you understand that you must create your own path, what will you do next? Elias remained silent. It was a difficult question. He knew he could not stay in the monastery forever, but returning to his old life was no longer an option. The monk looked at him and said, "There is an old tale of a man who entered a forest searching for a secret path to a hidden treasure. He walked for days but found nothing. Finally, a wise sage told him, 'The path is not already there in the forest. It is created by your footsteps.'" Elias suddenly realized there was no right path waiting for him. No one could tell him what his next step should be. It was a choice only he could make. The moment of decision. The next day, Elias met Brother Raphael for the last time before his departure. "What will you do now?" the monk asked. Elias took a deep breath. "I will return to the world, but I will not return as the man I once was. I will create my own path." Brother Raphael smiled. "Then you are truly ready." Elias bowed respectfully and left the monastery. But this time, he did not feel empty or lost. He knew now that the path he sought was not something pre-made. It would appear only when he began to walk. At the peak of Montserrat, the first light of dawn broke through the horizon. Elias descended the mountain, carrying with him something more valuable than any treasure, a soul that had awakened. Part 5. A New Journey. When one becomes a guide, returning to the world, Elias returned to Barcelona after months of living at the Montserrat monastery. Everything seemed unchanged. The bustling streets, the crowded cafes, the blend of ancient buildings and modern life. But one thing had changed: himself. He now saw the world through new eyes. Before, he had felt trapped in the endless cycle of a purposeless life. Now, he understood that meaning was not something to be found, but something to be created. But a greater question awaited him. What would he do with this awakening? the wanderer cannot stay in one place. Nietzsche once said, "You must still have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." Elias knew he could not return to his old job, but he also could not live forever as a hermit. A truly awakened person is not someone who abandons the world, but someone who returns to change it. He began writing, documenting what he had learned, sharing the philosophies that had transformed his life. But writing alone was not enough. Elias longed for real human connection, for change that existed beyond words. And so he made a decision that even he had not expected. He would travel the world, seeking those who felt lost, helping them find their way again, not by teaching them, but by awakening in them the ability to see themselves, a journey to spread the light. Elias's journey began in Europe. He traveled through great cities, Paris, London, Berlin, then ventured into the quiet countryside of Italy and Portugal. He met people from all walks of life, a businessman who had lost his sense of purpose, an artist doubting their talent, a student unsure of what they truly wanted. And strangely, despite their different backgrounds, cultures, and circumstances, they all had one thing in common. They were trapped in their own minds. They lived according to society's expectations, afraid of failure, afraid of change, afraid of facing themselves. Elias did not give them answers. He asked them questions. What truly makes you want to wake up in the morning? If no one were watching or judging you, how would you live? If you knew you had only 1 year left to live, what would you do? When asked at the right time, to the right person, these questions were like sparks that ignited self-awareness. Elias was not a teacher. He was a catalyst, a reminder of what people had forgotten within themselves. And then, those people began to change. When one becomes a guide one day in a small cafe in Amsterdam, a young man sat across from Elias. 2 years ago, I read an article you wrote about your journey in Montserrat, he said. It changed the way I see the world. Elias listened in silence. The young man continued, I spent my whole life following my parents' expectations. I became a lawyer, but I never truly loved it. After reading your article, I decided to quit my job, travel, and search for what I really love. Now, I help young people like me find their own paths. Elias smiled. This was the moment he realized, awakening does not stop with one person, it spreads. When one person finds their way, they do not keep it to themselves. They pass it on. And slowly, the world begins to change. The end of one journey, the beginning of another. One day, Elias returned to Montserrat, the place where his journey had begun. He entered the monastery and found Brother Raphael. I have found my path, Elias said. The monk nodded. But do you realize that this is only the beginning? Elias smiled. Yes, and I would not have it any other way. Because he now understood, a true path has no final destination. It only opens new doors. As the golden light of sunset bathed the ancient monastery, Elias walked forward, carrying with him the light of awareness, knowing that one day that light would spread to others. And that is how the world truly changes. Not through great revolutions, but through small awakenings, starting with one person, then rippling outward like waves on an infinite lake.